Practices webinar. I'm Sean Kelleher, SFPE's Member Services Manager, and I'm glad you were able to join us today. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to take a moment to familiarize you with the GoToWebinar system. First, the toolbar that you see on your screen is unique to you, and you may minimize that at any time. You will also notice that due to the large number of individuals on today's call, the default setting for this webinar has all attendees muted. However, we do encourage your participation. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions or would like clarification on a matter, please use the Questions toolbar feature and type your question or comment. Those will go directly to me, and I will facilitate a Q&A session with our speaker at the end of the session. If we run out of time, please feel free to follow up with our speaker after the event. So let's get started. Today's speaker is Jeffrey Fenner. Jeffrey Fenner, CPA, is a partner in charge of nonprofit organization services for Brooks Harrison Company, LLC. Jeffrey has specialized in accounting, exempt organization tax, and consulting services for nonprofit organizations for over 25 years. Jeffrey has also served as an officer and board member on several nonprofit organizations. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeffrey to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us today. You know the topic. Just to give you a short outline, we'll be talking about general insurance requirements. We'll be talking about IRS and state filing requirements for your chapters. And the filing requirements we'll talk about will include application for exemption and group exemption, annual 990 filing requirements, unrelated business income tax, payroll taxes, service payments, and annual charitable solicitation requirements. I'm going to try to cover all of that in about 20 to 30 minutes and have time for questions at the end. I can't see your what the questions that you enter, but Sean, the moderator, will share those with me as he can fit them in. Many of the items don't apply to all of you, so the things that don't apply to many I'm going to try to cover very, very quickly. But please don't hesitate to send a follow-up email, and I will try to send out both a copy of this presentation to all of you, but also a list of the questions and answers that I've provided. As far as insurance requirements go, there's a few key areas that we're going to talk about. First, I want to say that the entity type that your organization operates under matters a great deal. Hopefully, most of you are incorporated, and the corporation structure will give you the best liability protection for your officers and directors and employees. Very few of you, probably none of you, are what we would say call LL entities, LLCs or LLPs, or partnerships. Some of you may be unincorporated associations, which means you may or may not have filed anything with your state to recognize you as an official entity. That doesn't mean you can't be operating, but I would encourage you to incorporate, and that will make the insurance process stronger. Director and officer liability insurance is very important. As Sean mentioned, I serve on other boards, and I won't serve on a board unless I know that they have D&O insurance in order to protect the directors and officers' personal assets from some mistake or error or accident that could happen that's associated with the organization. I think the risk, this very rarely that a director or officer of a nonprofit is exposed in that way, but it can happen. And in the event that it does happen, you would want to have that insurance. General business liability insurance protects the business assets. So you would look at your organization and ask, what assets do we have to protect? What's our vulnerability in the event that somebody slips and falls at one of our events, or any of the millions of other things that can go wrong and create a liability. If you have employees, your states most likely require you to have workers' compensation insurance. I'm not an insurance expert, so it's important that if you have questions about or needs in this area that you can consult an agent or two to get their advice. On to IRS filing requirements. We're going to talk about the application for exemption and the group exemption, the annual information return, unrelated business income, and payroll taxes. If we can find it. Here we go. Applications for exemption. When an organization is formed and recognized, in order to be recognized by the IRS as a nonprofit organization, an application for exemption usually has to be filed. For a professional association, you would file Form 1024, and for a charitable organization, you'd file Form 1023. Now, because you're affiliated with SFPE, you can be a part of their group exemption as an association and would not have to file the Form 1024. And this is an important thing to be able to take advantage of because it reduces that initial filing requirement. Most of you will probably have this already taken care of, but it's important to note that's an option that's available. As far as the 1023 for a charitable entity, most of you probably don't have a charitable entity, but you could. And reasons why you might have one is if you want to receive tax-deductible contributions for educational or other charitable purposes that your organization might carry on. The group exemption, in order to be eligible for the group exemption under SFPE and not have to file the Form 1024 application for exemption, you need to be following the Society for Fire Protection Engineers chapter requirements. You have to notify SFPE that you will wish to be covered under their group exemption, and then on an ongoing basis, year to year, you would have to notify SFPE of any changes to your activities, your status, or if you didn't want to any longer be covered under their group exemption. It's very, very important to note that this does not change your annual filing requirement. If your exempt status is revoked for non-filing, then you cannot be covered in the future under the group exemption. If you have your exempt status revoked by the IRS, you will have to then go back and file the application for exemption, Form 1024. John, any questions that we need to touch on yet?
Not yet, Jeff, but Jeffrey, we'll wait till the end of the session, and we can do the question and answer session then.
Okay, great. The applications for exemption, quickly, just to show you what they look like. This is for a professional association. You would most likely be a 501c6 organization. The application requires general information about the organization, narratives about what you have done in the past in terms of activities, what you plan to do in the future, where your money is going to come from, and many other questions. The Form 1024 is not too difficult. You could fill this out yourself. It would be, one option is to use a template, which we could provide to SFPE if you had a need to file a Form 1024. The 1023, which is specifically for charities, is a much more complicated and extensive form because they're granting tax-deductible status to the contributions to your organization, or to your charity, I would say. So this form, in the absence of a template, you would probably not be best off to do it yourself, or at least you would want to consult with a CPA or attorney who's experienced with nonprofit issues. Now, this is where we get to the point that this applies to everyone. The annual information return filing requirements. Professional associations must file excuse me, Form 990 Form 990EZ or 990N annually. The threshold allowing you to file Form 990Z is that your gross receipts have $200,000 and your total assets have to be less than $500,000. The threshold for the 990N is gross receipts of $50,000 and total assets of $500,000. So I think most of the chapters would be eligible for the 990N, but some of you would not be. Just to take a quick look at those forms, the 990 itself is very extensive, and this is the 12 main pages of the form. There are additional schedules that are almost always required, so you would expect it to be bigger than this. I would not recommend preparing this form yourself. It's going to cost you probably $900 to $1,500 if you had to file the Form 990 to have someone prepare it for you. The 990EZ, you probably could prepare this by yourself if you wanted to subject yourself to that sort of abuse. It's really not too hard, but this is 4 pages. You're likely to have, or possibly going to have, additional schedules. It would cost probably $500 to $600 to have this prepared outside by someone who's experienced in preparing these forms. You can find people that will charge you more, and you can find people that will charge you less. But I'm giving you ideas of what the fees you should try to get to. The sweet spot, if you will. The easiest of all these is the 990N, which is merely done online, and you should not pay anybody else to do this. You can find this by Googling 990N and clicking through until you get to this screen you see here. This is a sample, and you see where it says register new user and then create your Form 990N. And it merely requires name and address type of information. So it's a very simple to do this. The filing deadline is the 15th day of the 5th month after your fiscal year end. I imagine most of you are calendar year ends, which means that the filing deadline would be May 15th. There's an automatic 3-month extension available by filing Form 8868. Now, the important thing to know about all this is the penalties. For late filing of 990EZ, it can be up to $20 a day. For late filing of the 990, it could be up to $100 per day. So, for example, if you these calculations are based on the original due date. So even if you've had the extension, the 3-month extension for a calendar year would extend you from May 15th to August 15th. Now that's 90 days, so that's about $1,800 just for the 990EZ if you were 1 or 2 days late on the August 15th extended deadline. And obviously a lot more if it's a 990. Now, the 990N, there's no penalty, and from a practical standpoint, you can get away without filing this for almost 3 years. But if you haven't filed for 3 years, your exempt status will be revoked. So it's important to have in your annual reminder, if you are in the 990N range, to make sure that you still get this filed every year. There's very few things that get filed on less than an annual basis, and it's very easy for those to get missed. And because many of you are on the SFPE group exemption, it would be a real hardship to have your exemption revoked and have to get it reinstated by filing of your first Form 1024. Some of you may have unrelated business taxable income. If you do, you are required to file Form 990T. Unrelated business Income is income from activities that you don't carry on, or I'm sorry, that you do carry on regularly, but are not related to your exempt purpose, which in most of your cases would be specifically serving your members. Examples of these would be advertising. You may have a newsletter, and that newsletter, you may sell ads in that. If the revenue from the advertising in the newsletter exceeds the cost, the entire cost of producing the entire newsletter, then you have a net income from the overall activity. You can make money on the advertising alone, but if it's offset 100% or more by the cost of producing the publication, whether it be electronic newsletter or paper or whatever it is, then you have the tax. It's only if the advertising revenue exceeds the total cost and other revenue you might generate. So you have to look at the activity as a whole. You may have sales of certain products unrelated to member services. If you're selling educational materials or technical materials to your members, that would not be included in this, or even to the general public, probably not included in this. But if you are selling food at an event, or if you are selling, particularly if it's to the general public, or if you are selling perhaps a bobblehead doll, that's a firefighter, that would be considered possibly taxable income, or it would be taxable income if you have a net income from the activity. And that would be looking at the specific sales item income versus some grander scope of activity like we talked about with the publication and advertising. Some organizations have space that they also rent out. That too could be taxable, a taxable activity. So if you have net income and the threshold is $1,000, you have net income from one of these activities or other activities that are not related to your member services or your other exempt purpose, and you carry them on regularly, then you should get in the habit of filing a 990T before the IRS figures out that you should have been. You will need to consult a CPA specializing in exempt organizations to handle this issue if you have it. Payroll taxes, there's a number of types of payroll taxes that you have to deal with. The bottom line for payroll taxes, if you have employees, then you should engage a payroll service company. The cost benefit of doing it yourself is just not there. It may be in the short run, but generally at some point you're going to get notices about something from the IRS and have to produce a bunch of paperwork and recalculate things and pay penalties. If you may be late on a tax payment, a payroll related, whatever it is, that's where it catches up to you, and then you'd wish you had hired a payroll service company. One thing I want to share with you is that it's important when you have a payroll service company to restrict their access to your bank accounts. Oftentimes, payroll companies can take your payroll information over the phone or by email or online and then take the money right out of your bank account. And I would strongly recommend that you control in a way that limits your there have been numerous cases where there is an error that costs you money straight out of your bank account. There are also fraud that occurs where someone can hack into the payroll service system, and the payroll service may think that somebody hacked into your system, and they may blame you. And I've seen where an organization has not been able to recover the money that disappeared from their account because it paid some fictitious employee. Now, this was actually the one I'm thinking of now was a Washington, D.C. organization that ended up paying somebody's payroll in Tennessee, and it was a result of a fraud. Another example is just errors, but it's definitely worth it to make sure you control that aspect with your payroll service company. Service payments, 1099. If you have if you pay for services for medical services, which you probably don't, legal services, which you probably do sometimes, and then any other service that's paid to a non-corporate entity. Those, if you pay an aggregate amount of over $600 or more, then in any one calendar year, then that vendor you need to send that vendor a 1099, that service provider a 1099. And you need to send an IRS a copy of the 1099s you send to your service providers. The deadline to the service providers is January 31st, and to the IRS is February 28th. For example, if you pay me to do your 990 EZ, if you only pay me $500 and you don't pay anything else, you don't have to send me a 1099. My business, Brooks Harrison Company, is an LLC, so it's one of those LL entities. It's not a corporation. That's why it would fall under the non-corporate entity eligible for receiving 1099s. If you pay more than $600 again, then you need to send the 1099. State solicitation filing requirements. If all states, or almost all states actually, require some sort of annual filing if you solicit contributions from the general public. This is not your members. It's generally people that you don't know. For instance, if you do a mailing for contributions to the general public, if you have a professional fundraiser that might do phone solicitations, these trigger this requirement. And the requirement generally applies when based on where the money is coming from and your home state. So your home state would require you to follow this, and then any state where you're getting money from would require you to file this, meet these filing requirements. Let's try to see if there's anything else here that I want to cover on this. Just let me point out that every state is different as it shows here on the slide. So it's really important to look at each state that you might have these requirements apply. Any place where you have money where you're soliciting contributions. Many of you probably, or most of you may not solicit contributions from the general public, but some of you may, and this can be a very, very complicated process. The forms aren't too hard to fill out, but if you have money coming from 20 states, it's a lot of forms. Also, most small organizations tend to wait until the states ask them, and from my experience, I've always seen the states be quite happy to have you get caught up, so to speak. That doesn't mean that this can't change tomorrow in any given state, but that tends to be the practice in the real world, so to speak. Okay, Sean, what do we have?
Thanks, Jeffrey. We do have some questions, so I'll just start right from the top. The first question is, we have not done our annual filings because we have not met for the past 4 years. I received a notice from the IRS, so that means we now have to file the N-1024?
Okay, let me see if I understand the question. Why don't you repeat it to me one more time and see if I can make sure I understand, Sean.
Okay. We have not done the annual filings because we have not met for the past 4 years. I just received a notice from the IRS.
Sean, what do you think that means? Or if Nicole, if you're on, you have not met for the past 4 years.
I think it means they haven't submitted probably their N-990 postcard for the past 4 years.
Okay, then the notice would be that your exempt status has been revoked. And so then, yes, you need to file the Form 1024, application for exemption for your professional organization. I assume we're talking about a chapter here.
Yes, we are.
So, Jeffrey, these are all chapters that are on the call. And
okay.
I think what I also heard in that question, Sean, you could probably unmute the person as well and have them ask the question. But I think what I'm hearing is some of these chapters are very small, so it sounds like this chapter never met. So they haven't had any activity. They haven't done anything for several years, so I think that's why they said they weren't filing.
Right.
So maybe the question is around, is activity triggered to the filing deadlines, or just the fact that they're organized means regardless of activity they need to file?
Right. So presumably they were at some point exempt. They were either exempt because they had filed a previous 1024, or they were exempt because they were on your group exemption. Okay, and then they did not file the 990N. They didn't have any activity, so they would not have to file the 990EZ. They would not have to file the 990, but they would still have to file the 990N. They're not going to be punished if they don't file it for 1 or 2 years, but they're going to have their exemption revoked if it's not filed for 3 years. Unfortunately, the way the law is now, you can't get caught up on the filing and then get back on the group exemption. You do, in fact, have to file the 1024 application for exemption. So what I would suggest is that we have a follow-up where we possibly can create a template for SFPE chapters of the template 1024 that then the chapters might be able to use to tailor for their own needs. And
Jeffrey, just following up on that, how would a chapter know if they were no longer under the exemption? I mean, is there a way to confirm that if they're not sure if it's been, 36 months or 30 months? I mean, how would they know if they've been cut off?
Well, one easy way to do it is to go on and try to file the 990N, because if you can file it, then that will get you caught up just by filing one, and you'll be in the good graces of the IRS, for a couple more years, and hopefully you'll do it annually after that point. Another way to do it is to go. There is a website where you can check at the IRS to see if your exemption is still intact. So you would put your tax ID number in at the website, and I can't open up a browser and get that website right now, but if Sean can hold on to print out these questions so we can do follow-ups, I'll make sure I send the website out. And I'll make a note to add it to the package that I send to be distributed to everyone. So that's the website to check to see if your exempt status is still intact.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And I think Nicole had a good suggestion that I'll unmute the people who have questions so they can follow up with you, so I can make sure that they're asking the questions correctly. So
okay.
Let me start with Laura Woody had a question. So Laura, I'm going to unmute you, Laura, and if you'd like to just ask the question to Jeffrey directly.
Hi, Laura.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. You said that we had a certain organization number, most likely, when we filed I think the form number is what, 1024?
Mm-hmm.
So what was that organization number?
501c6.
Okay. Thanks. You went by that so fast. That's what we need to do, is the 1024, since our tax exempt status was revoked when we went to file.
Okay.
Okay.
And Laura, was that your question? The last question was yours?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now Patrick Kogoma had the question. Patrick, do you want to ask your question to Jeffrey?
Hi, Patrick.
Yeah. Hi, Jeffrey. Let's see. So back to that Form 990T. So we hold monthly meetings, and it's a luncheon type meeting at a restaurant or whatever. So if the cost, and we charge each member to attend, so if the amount that we receive exceeds the cost of the meeting, so we basically make a little profit, which we fund our scholarship program for. Do we have to file the 990T for that?
That should be okay. That's probably your members that are coming to that meeting?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we say members, are we talking officially paid memberships, or a lot of people come who haven't paid membership because we have both?
As long as the primary purpose of that activity has something to do with the reason that you're exempt. So you're probably talking about if there's a presentation at that meeting?
Yes, it's educational.
And something related to the technical information or other information that your chapter provides to members and to the public. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be fine. If you were having a dinner and you had a comedian and you invited a bunch of people, that would be a different issue. It may or may not fit into the 990T, but we would need to take a look at that.
Okay, I see. So, and then I had the other question. I might as well ask it now, but we also, when I became treasurer, I knew about the postcard thing. I didn't know about the deadline, but by the time I got involved with the organization, I filed the postcard, and then we got back the letter that I was denied because we hadn't filed on time the previous 3 times before, which unfortunately wasn't good for us. So we are going to have to file the 1024 to get our status back. But I guess my question is that something we're going to have to do ourselves, or is there any support or help from National SFPE? Now, I commented on developing a template.
Yeah, so we'll work with, this is National, we will work with Jeffrey on developing that template and then provide it to all of you. I'm not sure, Jeffrey, what you think the timeline for that would be.
It may depend on your time schedule as much as anything, but I think probably it can be done in a couple months pretty easily, and definitely be worth waiting for. I know that you want to get your organization status restored as quickly as possible, but it takes several months for the IRS to process those applications anyway. So I think it would be worth it to wait for the template, and because that's going to help you a great deal, particularly if you don't have a couple $1,000s to hire an outside organization to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had. I have to check, but I think we had a 501. We were recognized as a 501(c), I believe.
C3. Then you were a charity, and you'd file Form 1023, which is much more extensive. I'm not sure a template would be available for that. I'm not sure that you need that structure. That might be something that you might want to follow up with me separately and talk about what you're doing. And you could email me to the address on the screen right now. You could email me a copy of your articles of, I hope you have articles of incorporation or articles of organization and bylaws. You should, because you had a exemption. And if you forwarded those to me, I could take a look and give you some better advice on whether you should try to get the 501c3 back or whether the C6, which is a lot easier, would be sufficient.
Because I had, at a previous organization, I mean, the same thing basically happened where I came in and they hadn't filed and we lost our exempt status. And I remember for that organization, I went through that whole process, and it was pretty time-consuming because you had to submit, 3 to 5 years of financials. And the financials weren't in place. I mean, they weren't recorded, so I had to actually go back and put everything together. So I know that was a pretty involved form, like you said.
Yeah, let's follow up on that. You send me that information. I'll take a look, and I'll reply back, and maybe we can schedule a call. We're running a little bit out of time, so I want to make sure we get to enough questions here today. Sean?
Thank you, John.
Sean?
Sorry, Jeffrey. Thank you. I was on mute. So a question from one of our newer chapters who I just filed last week to get them under our exemption. I sent in the letter last week. How long will it take them to get under our tax status? Should they file for an extension? How long does that process take? I mailed the letter into the IRS last week.
You should be fine. When did as long as you're not within the 3-year window, you should be fine.
Yes,
as long as it hasn't been, several years that you've been operating without the exemption. And even so, it's probably not a terrible problem. But you will be able to find on the link that I'm going to provide that your organization is exempt under the group ruling, and then you will be able to go on and file the 990N at the link that's in this presentation.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. Here's another question. I'm going to try to read this one slow. Our e-postcard was rejected last year with the following errors. The return type indicated in the return header must match the return type established with the IRS for the EIN, and the EIN in the return must have been established as an exempt organization return filer in the e-file database. Do you know what that means?
I know what to do about it, to put it that way. When you have the link that we're going to send out that allows you to go and look up what the IRS has on record for you about you, your organization, make sure that that information matches what was put into the 990N filing. Okay, if it does match, then follow up an email with me, because it can be very tricky to work through these issues with the IRS, and sometimes it's a problem with their database. I had a nonprofit entity whose fiscal year end was changed for no reason known to them at the IRS records, so that the IRS then rejected their 990 filing. And that sounds very similar to the record or the information that you have, the message that they gave you. So it can be difficult to navigate that. The most likely issue is that there's some mismatch between the information that you're providing in the 990N and the information they have on their records. But it also could be that their records are wrong, in which case it requires some follow-up. So again, first check and log in and put your tax ID number in there and see what they have you on record for, and make sure that matches your 990. And if it does, you can send me an email, and if you email me a copy of your notice, I will have a better understanding of what's going on and be able to help you further.
All right, Jeffrey, I'm going to take 3 more questions. Our articles of incorporation were lost in 9/11. Our status has been revoked. Checked online at the IRS website. We want to get reincorporated, or we want to get this straightened out. Must we reincorporate? We did check with the state, and they could not find our papers from 1954. Is it an onerous process to reincorporate?
Reincorporating is usually pretty easy, and every state is a little bit different, and you have to deal with the state bureaucracy, but the process is usually pretty straightforward. You will need a new set of articles of incorporation. Many states provide a template for you for that, and you may not want to even have one that's that simple. But that process is usually pretty easy. One of the things that will do is that will create a new entity, so you can get a new tax ID number, and you can possibly be then included in the group exemption, even though your exemption was revoked. It is possible that won't work, but there's a good chance that it will, so that would be the course of action I would suggest you follow to start with. So again, it's usually pretty easy to go to your state and file the new articles of incorporation and pay a few administrative fees, and have your corporation or a new corporation instated, or the previous one can be reinstated as well. If it's reinstated, and you had your status revoked, again, you'll have to go back and file the application for exemption, unfortunately. If you create a new entity with a new tax ID number, you may be able to be included in the SFPE group exemption, which would save you from having to file the 1024. So there's a couple of options there. Okay?
Thanks, Jeffrey. If a chapter did not file their 990 for a couple previous years, how far back should they attempt to file?
If you had a filing requirement, then you are going to have to file back at least 3 years, maybe 4, depending on what the IRS tells you they want. Once you file the first one, in other words, if you filed for 2013, notices from the IRS about where are the other years. And then once you filed the other years, that would trigger the penalties, which you're going to max out on the daily penalty that we discussed earlier. So that can be pretty expensive. I don't know what the financial situation and what the filing thresholds you had are, but please don't hesitate to follow up with me with an email or call about that, because I know that is possibly going to be very expensive.
Okay.
I've also had excellent success. I don't want to jinx myself, but I have so far had a 100% track record over the years in getting penalties for late filing removed by nonprofits. Just because I said that, I may not be successful next time, but again, those penalties can be very high, particularly burdensome if you're a small organization. So please don't hesitate to follow up with me on that.
Okay, and then the last question was regarding the D&O insurance. The question is, based on what you said, even a small chapter should have D&O general liability insurance?
I would say that the small chapter should have D&O, not necessarily the general liability. It depends on the assets that you're trying to protect. If the assets aren't there in the entity and the entity is held liable, then that's a whole different thing than the directors and officers being held liable. So directors and officers should want you to have that D&O insurance.
Well, I think that's it with the questions. Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time to present this very useful information today. Like Jeffrey said, you can follow up with him or myself after the webinar. We'd be glad to take your questions, and I would also be glad to forward on your questions to Jeffrey. Nicole, Jeffrey, and I will get to work on some of the requests that you guys made during the webinar. And again, Jeffrey, thank you so much.
Sure. Have a great day.
You too.